My name is Phyllis Hartman. I am 66 years old, a widow, and for most of my life I worked as a librarian and part-time teacher. I lived a quiet existence, filled with books, small community events, and the kind of steady routines that keep a woman grounded after loss. I never expected the greatest storm of my life would come not from strangers, but from my own blood. Not long ago, I inherited $10 million from my late sister, Eleanor. She had no husband, no children, only her work as a researcher and her loyalty to me. That inheritance was meant to be her final gift, not just of money, but of trust. Yet only days later, I found myself in a hospital bed after a car accident that left me broken and dazed. And while I lay there, bruised and stitched, my son never came to visit. His wife laughed when she heard I was still breathing, and he dismissed me with words that cut deeper than any wound. No time for a useless old woman. Days later, they returned with a lawyer, eager to take everything. What they didn't know was that I had already set my plan in motion. That moment, lying in bed, hearing their voices at the door, I realized something important. Silence could be sharper than a scream, and patience could become the deadliest trap. If you stay with me, I will tell you exactly how I turn their cruelty back on them, and why sometimes the quietest revenge is the one that changes everything. Before I begin, may I ask you for something small? If this story touches you, if it makes you think of your own family, I'd be grateful if you stayed until the end and shared your thoughts. And if you enjoy stories of resilience and justice, I'd love for you to join me here by subscribing. It means more than you know, and it helps keep these stories alive for people who might need them most. The first thing I remember after the accident was the smell of disinfectant and the thin sound of the heart monitor. My body ached from head to toe. My ribs throbbed when I tried to breathe too deeply, and my vision swam whenever I opened my eyes. For a while, I thought perhaps I had already passed away, and this sterile brightness was a kind of waiting room between worlds. But then I heard the shuffle of feet in the hallway and the sharp creak of the hospital door. I blinked, expecting to see my son Todd. I imagined his worried face leaning toward me, his voice asking if I needed water or simply holding my hand. That is what any mother hopes for, isn't it? A child who remembers her sacrifices when she is most fragile. Instead, what I saw made my blood run cold. Todd entered, his suit perfectly pressed, his tie neat, his face a mask of irritation rather than concern. Behind him walked his wife, Lena, eyes narrowed and lips curved into a thin smile. She looked at me as though I were not her mother-in-law lying there, but a broken object taking up space. "She's awake," she asked with a faint chuckle, as if my survival was nothing but an inconvenience. Todd glanced down at me, and for a second I searched his expression for something human, something kind, but all he said was, "This complicates things." The third figure stepped inside, a man I didn't recognize carrying a folder under his arm, his gaze avoiding mine. He had the bearing of someone pretending to be professional, though his suit was too new and his shoes too shiny. My chest tightened as reality seeped in. The accident was no accident at all. The missing brake, the way the car swerved uncontrollably, the strange silence when I called for help before passing out, all of it formed a picture that made my stomach turn. Todd had already told the bank and some of our distant relatives that I was gone, dead. As though I were nothing more than an entry to be erased from the ledger of his ambitions. I wanted to speak, to scream, but my voice cracked and barely carried. The man with the folder shuffled papers as Todd moved closer to my bed. "Mother, we're here to make sure everything is in order," he said softly, though the softness was more threat than comfort. I noticed Nurse Gracie hovering near the door. She was young, perhaps in her 30s, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that betrayed both fear and loyalty. She met my gaze for a flicker of a second, and in that silent exchange I felt something stir. Someone was watching, Someone was still on my side. Dr. Rayner, my attending physician, entered shortly after. His presence forced Todd and Lena to smooth their sharp edges, to pretend to be dutiful children and caring in-laws. But I saw behind the performance. I saw the hunger in their eyes, the same hunger that had destroyed countless families when money entered the equation. My body was frail, but my mind was not. And while they thought me cornered, unable to resist, I knew one thing. I still had the strength to fight back. Not with fists, not with shouts, but with patience, with planning and with silence that would speak louder than their lies. Lying there, I realized this was no longer just about me. It was about Eleanor, about the trust she placed in me with her life's work, her fortune, her legacy. It was about little Evie, my granddaughter, whose innocence I refused to let be crushed under her parents' greed. And it was about every woman who had been dismissed as useless once her hair turned gray. They thought I was finished, but they were wrong. My story was only beginning, and so was my trap. When I close my eyes in that hospital bed, memories of my sister Eleanor come back to me like soft waves against a shore. She was older than me by 7 years, and in many ways she was more like a second mother than just a sister. Eleanor never married, never had children of her own. She devoted her life to research, quiet, meticulous, and often lonely work. But beneath her seriousness was a heart that understood me better than anyone else ever could. I remember the smell of her old study, stacked with journals and the faint aroma of tea she always left half-finished on her desk. She used to tell me that knowledge was a form of wealth no one could steal. And yet, in the end, she left me something far more tangible. She left me $10 million, the sum of her life savings and investments, carefully built over decades. When her attorney, Ms. Belle Navarro, first told me, I could hardly breathe. Belle handed me a sealed envelope, written in Eleanor's familiar script. Inside was a letter that shook me more than the news of the inheritance itself. "Make it mean something, Phyllis," she wrote in her firm but tender handwriting. "You are the only one who never demanded, never schemed, only showed up when I needed you. That is why this legacy belongs with you." At the bottom of the letter, in a small postscript, Eleanor had added something that at first seemed cryptic, but now rang in my ears like a warning. "Don't trust the charming ones. They're always the first to vanish." I didn't know then just how prophetic those words would be. Eleanor had been sick for months with pancreatic cancer. I was at her side during the last weeks, helping her sip broth, reading to her from the newspaper, holding her hand when the nights grew unbearable. Todd visited once. Lena never at all. They always had excuses, work deadlines, important dinners, things more pressing than family. Eleanor noticed. She said nothing, but her silence was an indictment sharper than words. When she passed, I stood by her bed, tears rolling down my cheeks, whispering a promise I intended to keep. I promised her that whatever she entrusted to me, I would honor it, not waste it, not let it be a curse. I had no idea that very promise would be tested so brutally by my own flesh and blood. Belle Navarro was unlike most attorneys I had met. She had a steeliness in her eyes, but also compassion. She told me gently that Eleanor's estate was free of disputes, that everything was in order. I remember asking her, "Why me? Why not a foundation or a university or anyone else?" Belle smiled and said, "Your sister knew people, Phyllis. She knew their motives. She trusted you to keep her legacy clean." The day I received the inheritance, I walked home with the weight of both gratitude and sorrow pressing on my shoulders. $10 million. It sounded absurd, like a figure from a newspaper headline, not something that could ever be tied to my quiet life. I made tea that evening, sat at the table, and stared at the letter again. Make it mean something. But my thoughts kept circling back to Todd, my son, the boy I had once sung to sleep, The child I had raised with bedtime stories and packed lunches, the young man who had gone off to college with my blessing and my last savings. Would he see this inheritance as a chance to stand taller with me? Or would he see it as a pile of gold waiting to be claimed? The truth was, I already knew the answer. Todd had been slipping away from me for years, drawn to power and money like a moth to flame. He had become a financial advisor, good at making other people trust him with their fortunes. But I had seen how quickly his loyalty could shift if there was something to be gained. Lena only sharpened that side of him, turning his ambition into greed. Still, as I sat alone with Eleanor's letter, I tried to believe that blood would hold stronger than money. I even thought of using part of the inheritance to set up a college fund for Evie. Something Lena would never approve of, but something that might plant a seed of love between grandmother and granddaughter. I thought of repairing the roof of my small house, of maybe traveling to the coast one last time to smell the salt air and watch the waves. Simple things. Things that spoke of life, not just of wealth. That night, I tucked Eleanor's letter into a small wooden box where I kept my most important papers. I locked it, slid it into the drawer, and whispered into the silence, "I'll make it mean something, I promise." The very next day, I called Todd to tell him the news, hoping that my joy might spark a flicker of pride in him. Instead, his voice on the other end of the line was cold, clipped. "Mother," he said, "you've just made your life a whole lot more complicated." I didn't fully understand the weight of those words until later. At the time, I told myself he was simply overwhelmed, maybe even envious. But deep down, a shadow passed through me, and Eleanor's warning echoed once more. Don't trust the charming ones. I wanted to believe that family meant more than greed. I wanted to believe that my son would remember the warmth of my arms, not just the weight of money. But the days ahead would prove me wrong in ways more chilling than I could have imagined. Family is supposed to be the anchor that steadies you when storms come, but in my case, it had long felt like a rope fraying thread by thread. My son Todd had grown into a man who wore success like a polished suit, but beneath it was a hunger that never seemed to be fed. He'd become a financial advisor, one who thrived on charm and quick calculations. I once thought he would use those skills to build a good life, maybe even to protect me in my old age. Instead, I watched him twist them into tools for ambition. I remember the day he first asked me for money. He was in his late 20s, still finding his footing, and he wanted to open his own office. I gave him nearly everything I had saved, believing a mother's role was to give her child the wings to fly. He promised me repayment, promised me gratitude, but the years passed without either. The office thrived. His name appeared in glossy brochures, and yet he never spoke of the sacrifice that had built his foundation. Lena, his wife, entered our lives soon after. She was beautiful in the way that made rooms turn to look, with a sharp intelligence that quickly revealed itself as something colder, calculated, ambitious. Where I sought warmth, she sought control. Where I tried to nurture, she tried to cut down. Todd adored her confidence, perhaps because it shielded his own insecurities. To me, she was a constant reminder that my place in my son's world was shrinking. There were small moments that showed me exactly where I stood. One autumn afternoon, I brought a box of books for Evie, my granddaughter. She was only 6 at the time, already curious and bright, her little hands tracing the pages as I read to her. She drew me a picture with crayons, 2 stick figures, one tall with glasses, the other small with curly hair. At the top, she scrawled, "I love you, Grandma." My heart swelled, and I tucked it into my bag to treasure. But Lena saw it. She plucked the drawing from my hand, her smile stiff and her words sharper than the edge of paper. "Evie doesn't need this kind of sentiment," she said, tearing it in front of me before dropping it into the trash. "She needs to learn strength, not cling to weakness." The look in Evie's eyes haunts me still. Tears welled, but she didn't cry. She simply reached for my hand as if to say she understood, even if she couldn't put it into words. That moment etched itself into my soul, proof that even in the smallest heart, love can survive cruelty. Todd never defended me. He stood beside Lena, nodding, as though her harshness was simply truth. I learned then that silence could be just as cruel as words. Our dinners together became fewer, and when they did happen, conversation turned to investments, properties, and clients. Todd spoke of wealth as if it were the only language worth learning. Lena corrected me if I forgot a term, made jokes about my old-fashioned habits, and never missed a chance to remind me that I lived in a modest house while they lived in a sleek, modern home with polished marble floors. Still, I clung to hope. I told myself that beneath the ambition and the arrogance, Todd was still my boy. I remembered him running across the yard with scraped knees, begging me to read him one more bedtime story. I remembered the warmth of his small body curled against me when thunderstorms rattled the windows. I told myself that love like that didn't vanish. It only got buried. But with each year, the distance grew wider. He stopped calling unless he needed something. Lena discouraged Evie from visiting, saying the drive was too long or that their schedule was too packed. I often sat by the window with a pot of tea cooling beside me, waiting for a knock that never came. It was during one of those long evenings, staring at the shadows lengthening in my quiet house, that I admitted to myself the truth. I had raised a son who measured life in gains and losses, who saw love as weakness, who had forgotten the roots that had nurtured him. Yet I refused to let despair consume me. I poured my energy into the small rituals that kept me grounded, tending the garden, reading at the community library, writing letters I never sent. Perhaps these were acts of survival more than hope. When I told Todd about Eleanor's inheritance, his reaction didn't surprise me. It wasn't gratitude or even curiosity. It was calculation. His eyes narrowed, his voice grew cold, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind. For him, it wasn't a gift to celebrate, but an opportunity to seize. That is when Lena's words returned to me, the ones she had spat out months earlier during an argument about Evie. "You're not leaving her any morals, only weakness." She said it with such certainty, as though kindness itself were a flaw. Those words stung, but they also sparked something in me. If Lena believed my compassion was weakness, she had underestimated me. Because strength does not always roar. Sometimes, strength is the quiet refusal to break, the decision to stand firm when everyone expects you to crumble. And though they didn't yet know it, I was not a woman who would surrender easily. Eleanor's gift was not just money. It was a call to arms, a final request to live with honor. And for Evie, for myself, and for the sister I loved, I intended to answer that call. The morning I left Belle Navarro's office, the autumn air felt sharper than usual, as if the world itself sensed the storm that was about to break. Belle had explained the details of Eleanor's estate with her calm, measured tone. Everything was secure, she said, and I was now the sole beneficiary. She pressed the envelope with official documents into my hands, her eyes steady. "Guard this carefully, Mrs. Hartman. Your sister trusted you above all else." I nodded, clutching the papers like a shield, though I didn't yet know how badly I would need one. On my way home, I decided to call Todd. I wanted, foolishly perhaps, to share the news with him, hoping he might find joy in knowing his mother had been given a chance to live comfortably. Maybe he would even be proud that Eleanor had thought me worthy of such trust. When he answered, his voice was brisk, distracted, as if I had interrupted some important negotiation. "Mother," he said after I told him about the inheritance, "do you realize what you've done? You've just made your life a whole lot more complicated." His words landed like a stone in my chest. I tried to brush it off, to remind myself he was under stress. Todd, this could mean something good for all of us. Security for the future, for Evie. He cut me off. Stop. Don't bring Evie into this. You need to think carefully before you make mistakes you can't undo. I sat in silence, the phone heavy against my ear. His tone was not just cold, it carried a warning. When we ended the call, I found myself staring at the papers in my lap, Eleanor's words echoing in my mind, "Make it mean something." Half an hour later, I was driving along the winding road that curved down the ridge near my neighborhood. The air smelled of damp earth after an early rain, the pavement still slick. I remember adjusting the radio, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the seat where I had placed Eleanor's old watch. She had worn it every day, the face scratched, the leather band soft with age. When she passed, Belle had handed it to me, saying it was the only personal item Eleanor had insisted I keep. That watch was the last thing I saw before the world turned upside down. As I pressed the brake to slow for the next curve, nothing happened. My foot slammed against the pedal, but the car did not respond. Panic surged through me. I tried again, harder, the muscles in my legs straining, but the brakes were dead. The car lurched forward, faster, as the wet asphalt glistened under the dull sky. "God, no," I whispered, gripping the wheel, fighting to control the skid. The guardrail rushed toward me, the tires screamed, and the car jolted violently. My body slammed against the seatbelt, pain tearing through my chest. I heard the sickening crunch of metal, the shatter of glass, and then the faint clatter of Eleanor's watch as it tumbled to the floor. Everything blurred. The world spun in dizzying silence, then went dark. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying on a stretcher, the sterile brightness of the hospital ceiling above me. Voices floated in and out, clipped phrases, lost control, wet road, lucky to be alive. But I knew. Somewhere deep in my gut, I knew this wasn't luck. Later, Officer Lynn, the traffic officer assigned to my case, stopped by to ask a few questions. His notepad was neat, his demeanor professional, but there was something in the way he lingered over his notes that told me he suspected more than he was saying. "Mrs. Hartman?" he asked gently. "Had your car shown any problems with the brakes before?" "No," I answered, my voice still hoarse. "It was serviced just last month." He nodded, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Interesting. The road cameras in that section weren't functioning at the time. That's unusual. We'll be conducting a full inspection of your vehicle. I'll keep you updated." When he left, a chill ran through me. The missing camera, the sudden failure of brakes on a car recently serviced, it was too much to dismiss as coincidence. I thought of Todd's words, that sharp warning in his voice, and my stomach knotted. A mother doesn't want to believe her own child could plot against her, but the signs were stacking like bricks around me. And I remembered Eleanor's letter, the quiet plea hidden in her postscript. Don't trust the charming ones. They're always the first to vanish. That night, as the sedatives wore off and the pain pressed in, I stared at the ceiling and replayed the sound of that watch falling to the floorboard. It was almost as if Eleanor herself had been there with me, a reminder that her gift came with responsibility, not just comfort. Somewhere deep inside, a flame flickered. I would not let my sister's trust or my own life be crushed beneath the weight of greed. Whatever this was, accident or design, I would not go quietly. The first 5 days in the hospital blurred together, stitched with the steady beep of machines and the ache in my bones. I drifted in and out of shallow sleep, waking often to the sterile light and the faint footsteps of nurses in the hallway. Each morning, I told myself Todd would appear. Each afternoon, I convinced myself he was just delayed. By the 5th night, the truth settled like a weight on my chest. My son had no intention of coming. No flowers, no phone calls, no message asking if I needed anything. It was as if I had slipped out of his life completely. In fact, when I reached for my phone on the 2nd day, I found it nearly empty. Contacts deleted, recent calls erased. My heart pounded. At first, I thought I was confused, that the accident had scrambled my memory. But the phone was wiped clean, deliberately. Nurse Gracie was the one who noticed my unease. She was efficient, steady, the kind of nurse who never rushed through a task. On the third night, as she checked my IV line, she leaned closer and whispered, "Mrs. Hartman, did you have anyone visit yesterday evening?" I frowned. "No, why?" She glanced toward the door before answering. "I saw someone slip into your room after the evening shift. I thought it was family, but they didn't sign in at the desk. When I came back a few minutes later, they were gone." The words chilled me. I searched the room with new eyes. The nightstand drawer slightly ajar, the cabinet lock scratched. My skin prickled. Someone had been there, not to comfort me, but to take something. The next morning, I asked the hospital staff for a printout of my recent bank activity. It took hours of calls and insistent requests, but when the papers finally arrived, my hands trembled as I flipped through them. Nearly $300,000 had been withdrawn in a series of transfers I hadn't authorized. I gripped the sheets until they crumpled. Todd's voice from that last call echoed in my ears. "You've just made your life a whole lot more complicated." Later that day, Dr. Rayner came by. His presence was calm, a counterweight to the storm brewing in me. He adjusted the monitor and said gently, "Your recovery is going well, Mrs. Hartman, but I need you to tell me if you're under any unusual stress. Sometimes healing depends on more than the body." I wanted to scream the truth at him, to pour out every suspicion boiling inside me, but something held me back. Trust needed to be rationed carefully now. Instead, I gave him a tight smile and said, "Stress finds us all eventually, doesn't it, doctor?" Still, I saw his eyes linger on me, thoughtful, as if he knew there was more I wasn't saying. That night, I couldn't sleep. The shadows stretched long across the ceiling, and every creak of the building made my pulse race. Around midnight, the door clicked softly. I held my breath, pretending to sleep. A shape moved in the dim light, crouching near the cabinet. My heart pounded so hard I feared it would betray me. Before I could react, the hallway light snapped on, and Mr. Huckley, the night guard, appeared. "Hey!" he barked. The shadow bolted, footsteps pounding down the corridor. Huckley gave chase, but the intruder vanished before security could catch them. When he returned, his face was flushed, his chest heaving. "They knew what they were doing," he muttered. "Went straight for your things." The reality pressed in on me then. This wasn't random. Someone was working methodically to erase me, first through a staged accident, then by emptying my accounts, and now by breaking into my hospital room. Gracie stayed by my bedside after that incident, her jaw set with determination. "Mrs. Hartman, I don't know what's going on, but you're not alone," she said softly. Her words were like a thread pulling me back from the edge. For the first time, I began to see the outlines of a plan forming, though faint and fragile. If they thought I was helpless, maybe I could use that against them. But for now, all I could do was gather strength, watch, and wait. By the fifth dawn, I no longer expected Todd to walk through the door. That hope had died quietly sometime in the night, replaced by something colder and sharper. My son had chosen his path, and it led away from me. I stared at the blank hospital wall, my pulse steadying. If they believed I was powerless, they would soon learn how wrong they were. By the sixth morning, I had almost grown used to the routine of sterile meals, vital checks, and the quiet hum of the machines. What I hadn't grown used to was the emptiness of my room, the constant reminder that I had been abandoned. That morning, however, the silence broke. The door opened with deliberate force, and in walked Todd and Lena. They were dressed impeccably, as if they had come from a board meeting rather than to see an injured mother. Todd carried a thin leather folder under his arm, and Lena's heels clicked sharply on the tile floor. Her smile was polite but not kind, the sort of smile that hides a knife behind it. Behind them trailed the man I had glimpsed before, the stranger with the too-new suit and the eyes that never quite met mine. He carried a stack of papers and introduced himself in a flat tone. "I'm Mr. Doyle, here to help ensure your affairs are properly managed." I felt my body stiffen. Something about the way he shuffled the papers, the lack of warmth in his voice, told me immediately this man wasn't who he claimed to be. Todd moved closer to my bed, speaking in a tone that was falsely soothing. "Mother, you've been through a lot. We know how exhausting this must be. That's why we've brought some documents. It's just to help ease the burden on you. You won't have to worry about bills, property, or anything. We'll handle it all." Lena placed a pen on the tray by my bed. "All you need to do," she said smoothly, "is sign here. Then you can focus on getting better." My hands trembled slightly, but not from weakness. I reached for the papers slowly, pretending to glance over them. The top sheet looked official, with seals and dense legal wording. But as my eyes traced the lines, my stomach dropped. This was no simple convenience form. It was a power of attorney granting Todd and Lena complete control over my finances, my estate, my decisions. I lifted my gaze to them. This says I give you authority over everything." Todd waved a hand as if brushing off a minor detail. "It's just a formality. You're in no state to manage these things. Courts require clarity. It's for your own protection." I looked at Lena. She leaned closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "Then maybe next time, we won't ask nicely." Her lips curved upward, her eyes gleaming with menace. The threat was so casual, so intimate, it chilled me more than if she had shouted. I placed the papers back on the tray with deliberate care. "No," I said softly. My voice did not rise. It didn't need to. "I will not sign." Todd's face tightened, the charming mask slipping for a moment. He leaned in, his voice laced with irritation. "Mother, be reasonable. This is the only way to make sure everything is done correctly." "No," I repeated, firmer now. For a beat, the room was silent except for the steady beep of the monitor. Mr. Doyle shifted uncomfortably, as though he hadn't expected resistance. Lena, however, only smiled. "Suit yourself," she said, sliding the pen back into her purse. "But don't say we didn't try." As they turned to leave, Todd paused in the doorway. "We'll see what the court has to say. Emergency guardianship is an option when someone is no longer capable of making decisions. Don't make this harder than it has to be." The word struck like a gavel. They were planning to declare me incompetent, to strip me of not just my money, but my autonomy, my very identity. When the door closed behind them, I sat in the stillness, my hands clenched in the sheets. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to steady the rush of fear. They thought they had cornered me, that I would cave under pressure, but I had no intention of handing them my life on a silver platter. Nurse Gracie appeared minutes later, her brow furrowed. She had overheard enough to understand. "They can't do that," she said fiercely. "You're not incapable. You're stronger than they realize." I gave her a small, grim smile. "Then we'll have to prove it." In that moment, the path ahead became clearer. If Todd and Lena wanted a battle, they would have one. But not on their terms. They would think I was weak, think I was cornered, and that illusion would be the very thing that undid them. That night, I lay, awake, my mind sharper than it had been in weeks. My body ached, but my spirit burned. They believed my silence meant surrender. They would soon learn it meant strategy. The night after Todd and Lena left with their fake lawyer, I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The fluorescent light above the bed hummed softly, and every sound in the hallway sharpened my awareness. I knew I couldn't outmuscle them, couldn't shout loud enough to win. But I could think. I could plan. Nurse Gracie entered quietly to check my vitals. She noticed my eyes wide open. You didn't close your eyes once tonight? She said softly. I can't, I whispered back. If I let them corner me, I'll lose everything. Not just the money, my dignity, my granddaughter. Gracie hesitated, then leaned closer. I believe you, she said, and I think I can help. From her pocket, she pulled out a small phone. This isn't logged by the hospital system. If you need to make a private call, use this. No one else will know. I took the phone with trembling fingers. The trust she placed in me was a lifeline. Thank you, I whispered, my throat tightening. That night, with the ward quiet around me, I dialed a number I had memorized from the day Belle Navarro gave me Eleanor's letter. My sister's attorney answered after 2 rings, her voice steady and low. Mrs. Hartman? Yes, I said. It's time we talked. Belle arrived the following morning, disguised as a family visitor, her hair tucked under a scarf, glasses perched on her nose. To anyone else, she looked like an ant dropping in with flowers. But when she sat by my bed, her eyes carried the weight of someone used to battles fought on paper and in courtrooms. You're right to be cautious, Belle said after I explained what had happened. They can't win unless you let them, but we need evidence. Proof that they're not acting in your best interest. Gracie stood quietly by the door, keeping watch. For the first time in days, I didn't feel completely alone. How? I asked. Belle's answer was simple. We set the stage. We let them reveal themselves, and we record every step. The plan unfolded in hushed tones. Small cameras could be installed, hidden in plain sight. Signatures could be tested against Eleanor's original documents to prove forgery. A financial trail could be traced to show withdrawals and offshore transfers. Your silence will be your greatest weapon, Belle said. They think you're weak. Let them think so. Gracie nodded. I can help with placement of cameras. I'll keep watch when they visit. I felt my chest tighten, not from fear this time, but from the realization that I wasn't fighting alone anymore. My allies were unexpected, a young nurse with steady hands and an attorney who believed in justice more than profit. Later that day, Belle made a call of her own from the hallway. She returned with a faint smile. I'm bringing in someone else, discreet, experienced. Who? I asked. An investigator, she said. He'll pose as a property appraiser, someone Todd and Lena won't suspect. His job will be to collect what we can't. It felt dangerous, conspiratorial, but also exhilarating. For days, I had felt powerless, like a pawn waiting to be swept off the board. Now, for the first time, I felt like I was moving pieces of my own. That evening, I looked out the window at the setting sun painting streaks of orange across the sky. I thought of Eleanor, her quiet voice urging me to make her gift mean something. I thought of little Evie, her wide eyes searching for truth even as her parents tried to twist her world. And I thought of the trap that was slowly, carefully taking shape. Before Belle left, she squeezed my hand. Courage doesn't always look loud, Mrs. Hartman. Sometimes it's the patient kind, the kind that waits until the right moment. I nodded. I can wait. That night, as Gracie checked the monitors one last time, she whispered, You're stronger than they know. Let them underestimate you. It will be their mistake. I closed my eyes with a strange calm settling over me. The fear was still there, but now it had a companion. Resolve. The storm was far from over, but at least I wasn't standing in it alone anymore. The following days passed like a play, where I had been cast in a role I never thought I would perform. I let my movements slow, my gaze wander, and my speech falter just enough to seem uncertain. Every sigh, every confused glance was deliberate. It was not easy. Pride has a way of resisting disguise, but survival demanded I look weaker than I felt. When Todd and Lena returned, their energy filled the sterile room like an icy draft. Lena perched at the foot of my bed, her smile sharp, her eyes glittering with calculation. Todd set his briefcase on the tray as though the hospital was his boardroom. Mother, he said, softening his voice in a tone meant for investors rather than family. "We're worried about you. You've been through so much. It's only natural that things might be slipping." I tilted my head slightly, blinking as if his words took longer to reach me. "Slipping?" I repeated, letting my voice wobble. I don't quite follow." Lena exchanged a quick glance with Todd, the corners of her lips twitching upward. They believed the act. Good. As they began talking about taking care of the estate, I let my eyes drift, pretending to lose focus. In truth, I was listening intently. Every word mattered. Todd spoke of liquidating certain assets and expediting transfers. Lena added details about a property she had already lined up for buyers. I caught the words before the paperwork clears. I felt my stomach twist, but I kept my face blank. A camera hidden in the clock on the wall captured every second. Belle had arranged it, and Gracie had installed it with quiet precision. "Of course," Lena continued, smoothing her skirt, "we'll make sure you're comfortable. This isn't about money. It's about doing what's best for the family." I let a faint smile touch my lips, slow and uncertain. "Best for the family," I echoed. "Yes, of course." The way she leaned back, satisfied, was all the confirmation I needed. Then it happened. In her eagerness, Lena turned toward the man Belle had sent, the investigator posing as a banking specialist. He stood quietly in the corner, clipboard in hand, a professional mask on his face. Lena mistook his silence for compliance. "She's nothing but an obstacle," she muttered under her breath, her tone sharp, forgetting herself. "Once this is done, we'll finally have full control." The words cut like a blade, but I did not react. Instead, I blinked slowly, as though I hadn't heard. Inside, my heart pounded with grim satisfaction. Their arrogance was handing me exactly what I needed. Todd cleared his throat, giving Lena a look, but it was too late. The sentence hung in the air, caught on camera, recorded in crisp detail. I adjusted my blanket, my hand shaking just enough to sell the illusion of frailty. "I'm tired now," I whispered. "Perhaps we can talk later." Todd leaned down, patting my hand in a gesture so false it made my skin crawl. "Rest well, Mother. We'll handle everything. You don't have to worry." When they left, the investigator caught my eye for the briefest moment. He gave a slight nod, confirming he had heard, confirming the trap was tightening. As the door closed, I let out the breath I had been holding. Gracie slipped in minutes later, her eyes bright with determination. "It worked," she whispered. "Every word was recorded." I sank back into the pillow, exhaustion washing over me. Acting weak was harder than I had imagined. It went against every instinct honed from years of independence, years of raising a child alone. But tonight, my silence and my frailty had become weapons sharper than any blade. In the stillness, I thought again of Eleanor. She had always said I underestimated myself, that I carried more steel in me than I admitted. Perhaps she had known all along that one day I would need to draw on it. The night stretched long, but for the first time, I didn't feel crushed under its weight. A plan was in motion, and Todd and Lena, blinded by greed, had just played their parts perfectly. That night, the hospital room was unusually quiet. Even the machines seemed to hum softer, as though they too were holding their breath. I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the events of the day, Lena's careless words echoing again and again. I turned onto my side, staring out the window where the city lights flickered faintly, distant and indifferent. When I couldn't bear the silence any longer, I whispered, "Gracie, are you still there?" She'd promised to check in through the night, and sure enough, her figure appeared in the dim light. She pulled a chair closer to my bed. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "My thoughts won't leave me alone." She folded her hands in her lap, waiting, and slowly I began to speak of something I hadn't shared in years. "Do you remember a man named Mr. Thorne?" I asked. Gracie tilted her head. The name sounds familiar. He used to be my neighbor, widower. We'd play chess on the porch in the evenings. He had a rose garden that stretched along his fence, the kind that filled the air with sweetness in summer. My voice softened with memory. He was a kind man, but he trusted too easily. His own daughter tricked him while he was sick. She brought him papers to sign, papers she said were for his medical care. In truth, they transferred his home into her name. By the time he realized, it was too late. She sold the house, emptied the accounts, left him with nothing. Gracie's eyes widened, sadness flickering in them. What happened to him? He moved into a small apartment across town. I visited once, and he looked like a man whose soul had been scraped hollow. He said to me, "Phyllis, betrayal by your own blood doesn't just break your heart. It rearranges it into something you don't recognize." I swallowed hard. He died a year later, but not before leaving me with a warning. Never sign anything when fear or guilt is the hand pushing the pen. The memory pressed heavy on me, a reminder of what could happen if I faltered now. "Do you know what saved him, in the end?" I asked. Gracie leaned closer. "What?" He had recorded a conversation, his daughter pressuring him, threatening to withhold care if he didn't sign. That recording became evidence. It didn't give him back his home, but it forced her to face consequences. It gave him some measure of justice. Gracie nodded slowly, the idea dawning on her face. So even when he felt powerless, his silence was not useless. He waited, he recorded, and when the time came, the truth spoke for him. "Yes," I whispered, "and that is what we must do now. Let them think I am too weak, too slow. Let them talk. Every word they drop is a stone in the wall we're building against them." The room fell into a thoughtful silence. Outside, a siren wailed faintly in the distance, then faded. After a while, Gracie smiled faintly. "You know, Mrs. Hartman, you're braver than most people I know. You've already survived so much. Maybe this is the moment your silence becomes your shield." I looked at her. This young nurse who had stepped into my life at the exact moment I needed an ally. "Or my sword," I said softly. Her eyes met mine, and in that quiet agreement, I felt a rare strength return. Later, when she left to check on another patient, I lay awake thinking not only of Mr. Thorne, but of Eleanor. My sister had left me her fortune, yes, but more importantly, she had left me her trust. I could almost hear her voice reminding me that money meant nothing without honor, that silence held its own kind of power if wielded carefully. I promised myself then that I would not become another Mr. Thorne, broken, emptied by betrayal. I would carry his story with me, not as a warning alone, but as a guide. The night stretched long. Shadows moved across the walls and the air grew cool. Still, I did not close my eyes. For the first time in days, my sleeplessness was not born of fear, but of resolve. I was waiting for the right moment, waiting for them to underestimate me again. And when they did, I would be ready. On the 6th morning, the air in my hospital room felt heavy, as if the walls themselves knew what was coming. I had begun to expect the visits only from Todd and Lena, sharp-edged encounters dressed in false smiles. But that day, the door opened gently, and I saw a small face peeking around the corner. "Grandma?" My breath caught. It was Evie. Her dark curls framed her cheeks, her eyes wide with both fear and excitement. Before I could speak, she rushed to my bedside, climbing carefully onto the chair next to me. Behind her stood Miss Carla, her former nanny, the woman I had once helped long ago when she was a frightened young mother with nowhere to go. Time had given her strength, but her eyes still carried the humility of someone who had never forgotten kindness. She pressed a finger to her lips and whispered, "We don't have much time. Lena doesn't know I brought her." Evie clutched a folded piece of paper in her tiny hands. She leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Daddy said you're gone, but I know you're not." She slid the paper into my palm with determination far beyond her years. I opened it carefully, my hands trembling. It was a drawing in bright crayons, me and her, hand in hand, standing under a large sun. Above us, written in uneven, shaky letters, "I love you, Grandma." Tears stung my eyes. I wanted to hold her forever, to tell her everything would be all right, but I could only manage a shaky smile. "You're braver than you know, Evie," I whispered. Carla placed a hand on my shoulder. "She's been asking for you. I couldn't stand by while they kept her away, and I need you to know something else. I've been watching, recording when I can. Phone calls between Todd and Lena, things I've overheard. I thought it might help." Her words struck me with both hope and sorrow. Hope, because she had risked herself to protect me. Sorrow, because it confirmed what I already feared. My son's betrayal ran deeper than I had imagined. "Carla," I said softly, "you could be putting yourself in danger." She shook her head firmly. "You once gave me a chance when no one else would. I'm only giving a piece of it back. Besides, I won't let Evie grow up believing cruelty always wins." Evie climbed onto the edge of my bed, curling against me with the innocence only a child can carry. Her warmth seeped into me, healing wounds no doctor could touch. "When can I come stay with you again?" she asked. I stroked her hair, hiding the ache in my chest. "Soon, my darling. Very soon." We didn't have long. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Carla stiffened, her eyes darting toward the door. "We have to go," she murmured. She helped Evie down gently, pressing a kiss onto her forehead before guiding her toward the exit. Before leaving, Carla turned back to me. "Hold on, Mrs. Hartman. You're not fighting alone anymore." The door closed and silence filled the room once more. But it wasn't the same silence I had endured for days. This silence was charged, alive, carrying the weight of a secret visit, a child's love, and a new layer of proof hidden safely away. I unfolded the drawing again, smoothing its crumpled edges. The crayon sun shone brightly, its uneven rays stretching across the paper. I traced the letters with my finger, hearing Eleanor's voice in my mind. Make it mean something. Yes, I thought, I will. For Evie, for Eleanor, for myself. Later that night, I tucked the drawing beneath my pillow, close to my heart. I knew the storm wasn't over. If anything, it was building. But now, I carried something stronger than fear. I carried love, loyalty, and allies, hidden in unexpected corners. The plan was no longer just about defending what was mine. It was about protecting the future of a little girl who still believed her grandmother was worth fighting for. The day after Evie's visit, I woke with a different kind of energy coursing through me. The crayon drawing lay under my pillow, a secret reminder that innocence and love were worth more than any inheritance. I traced its folds with my fingertips and whispered a silent promise. I would not let greed devour what little goodness remained in my family. That morning, Belle arrived in her quiet, deliberate way, carrying a folder tucked neatly under her arm. Gracie slipped in moments later with her cart, as though she were just checking vitals. Together we formed a small circle of trust in the sterile hospital room. "It's time," Belle said simply. "They think they're circling their prey, but it's really us drawing them in." I nodded, my pulse steady. "What do we need to do?" Belle unfolded her plan carefully. A mock meeting would be arranged, one that appeared to be a final step in securing control of my assets. Todd and Lena would be invited, along with their so-called attorney, Mr. Doyle. Present as well would be a representative from the bank and a man posing as a notary. In truth, both of them were Belle's allies, fully aware of what was about to happen. The room would be wired with cameras and recorders, each angle capturing the truth. "They'll believe they're winning," Belle explained. "That's when their arrogance will reveal everything." Gracie's eyes shone with fierce determination. "I'll help stage the room. I can keep staff from wandering in. No interruptions." I listened, my heart pounding with both fear and anticipation. The plan was bold, but it carried the weight of justice. If Todd and Lena thought I was fragile, they would walk straight into the net we had prepared. 2 days later, the stage was set. A conference room on the hospital's lower floor had been reserved. On the surface, it looked formal and sterile. A long table, neat stacks of paper, a potted plant in the corner. But behind the blandness lay every tool Belle needed. Micro cameras hidden in pens, recorders built into the clock, a watermark encoded into the documents that would trap Todd in his own signature. When Todd and Lena arrived, they carried themselves with smug confidence. Todd's suit was sharp, his tie immaculately knotted. Lena wore a fitted blazer, her heels clicking like a metronome of control. Doyle followed close behind, shuffling papers with the air of a man trying too hard to appear official. I was wheeled in by Gracie, a blanket draped over my knees, my body slumped as though exhaustion had claimed me. I kept my eyes lowered, my hands trembling just enough to sell the illusion. "Mother," Todd said smoothly, "thank you for agreeing to this. We know how difficult these matters can be in your condition." I lifted my gaze slowly, blinking as if confused. "Condition?" I murmured. Lena leaned forward, her voice sweetened with false sympathy. "You've been through so much. This is just to make sure everything transitions smoothly. You'll have no worries." The bank representative cleared his throat, playing his role perfectly. "We just need to confirm the authorization." He slid the papers across the table. Todd reached eagerly for the pen. As he signed, his voice carried the arrogance I had come to know too well. "Soon we'll have this all under control. She won't even have to think about it." Lena, careless in her confidence, added with a soft laugh, "She'll be out by next week. We'll have full control." The words hung in the air, crisp and undeniable. I glanced toward Belle, who sat quietly at the far end of the table, her eyes unreadable but steady. When Todd finished signing, the paper he placed back on the table looked ordinary enough, but Belle had marked it with a faint watermark, one that tied his false signature to evidence of forgery. "Is that all?" Todd asked, sliding the folder toward Doyle. Belle finally spoke, her voice calm and even. "That will be sufficient." In that moment, my heart steadied. They believed they had won, but the truth was already captured. Their words, their signatures, their greed, all neatly preserved in ways they could not erase. As Gracie wheeled me out, I let my head rest against the chair, my lips curving in the faintest smile. For the first time in weeks, I felt control returning, not loud or dramatic, but quiet, patient, undeniable. The trap was no longer an idea. It was real, and it was closing around them. The morning after the stage signing, I felt a subtle shift in the air. It was as if the storm clouds had gathered but were waiting for the perfect crack of thunder. Belle's plan had gone exactly as she predicted. Todd and Lena believed they had secured everything. Their overconfidence was beginning to grow so large, it filled the room before they even walked in. That afternoon, the door to my hospital room opened, and in stepped a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a clipboard under his arm. He introduced himself politely. "Mrs. Hartman, I'm Mr. Mather. I've been sent to conduct a property evaluation for the estate transition." His voice was calm, professional, carrying the sort of authority that immediately reassures. To Todd and Lena, who arrived minutes later, he appeared to be just another cog in the machinery of their victory. To me, he was the investigator Belle had promised. Todd shook his hand eagerly. "Glad you're here. We've got several properties to consider. Mother's house, and of course my aunt's old estate. We want everything documented properly so the transfers can proceed quickly." Lena stood beside him, her arms folded, her smile thin but triumphant. "Efficiency is key. The buyers don't like to wait." I lowered my gaze, keeping my frailty act alive. letting them speak as though I weren't there. Every word poured into the quiet microphones hidden nearby. Mr. Mather adjusted his glasses, flipping a page on his clipboard. "Buyers?" he asked casually. "I wasn't aware we were that far along." Todd leaned in, unable to hide his excitement. "Oh, we're more than far along. We've already secured a buyer for Eleanor's property. He's put down a substantial deposit. Once the paperwork clears, we'll close immediately." Lena added smoothly. "And that's just the beginning. There are accounts offshore, perfectly structured. We'll have liquidity by the end of the quarter." My stomach turned, though I kept my expression blank. Offshore accounts, deposits already paid. They weren't just circling my inheritance, they were already feasting on it. Mr. Mather raised a brow. "Offshore accounts? Interesting. Who is the listed beneficiary?" Lena's pride betrayed her. "The account's in my initials. LH. It's all perfectly legal." The words hung in the room like a noose tightening around her neck. She realized too late the danger of revealing such a detail to a stranger. Todd shot her a sharp glance, but the damage was done. "Of course," Todd interjected quickly, "we're only acting in Mother's best interest. She's not in a condition to handle such complexities. We're stepping in to protect the family legacy." I lifted my head just enough to meet Mr. Mather's eyes. For a fleeting moment, I let the faintest trace of strength slip through. My mask. He caught it, and I saw the flicker of recognition. He knew I was not nearly as broken as I appeared. Lena reached for the folder on the tray, sliding it toward Mr. Mather. "Review the details. You'll see everything is in order." He accepted it, nodding politely. "I'll take this with me and complete the evaluation." His tone was professional, but I detected the subtle weight of triumph beneath it. Every page, every boast, every careless admission was another thread woven into the net Belle was spinning. As Todd and Lena left the room, Todd patted my arm with a mock gentleness that made my skin crawl. "Don't worry, Mother. We'll make sure everything is handled. Just focus on resting." When the door closed behind them, I exhaled slowly, my chest aching not from injury but from the burden of what I had heard. Their greed had finally spoken aloud, unguarded and undeniable. Minutes later, Mr. Mather returned alone. His professional mask had softened, replaced with quiet resolve. "You did well," he said. "They trust too easily in their own cleverness. Everything they revealed today will hold in court." I nodded, the weight of exhaustion pressing down, but the fire of determination keeping me upright. "Thank you," I whispered, "for seeing through them." He gave a small smile. "Sometimes the loudest confession is the one they don't realize they've made." That night, as I lay in bed with the faint crayon drawing still hidden beneath my pillow, I closed my eyes and felt the balance of power begin to shift. For the first time, Todd and Lena's voices were not just weapons, they were evidence. And evidence, I knew, had a way of speaking louder than any plea for mercy. 2 days later, Belle arranged the final meeting. On the surface, it looked like a routine financial conference, the sort of dull formality banks require before major transfers. But in truth, it was the moment everything we had built toward would come to light. The conference room inside the bank building was cold, its walls bare except for a framed print of a sailboat and a clock that ticked too loudly. A long, polished table stretched across the room, papers neatly stacked at the center. Around it sat faces that Todd and Lena believed were allies. To me, they were witnesses. Gracie wheeled me in, her hands steady on the handles, her presence a silent reassurance. I sat with my blanket tucked across my lap, eyes lowered, playing the part of the weakened mother. But inside, I was steel. Todd adjusted his cufflinks as he settled at the head of the table, acting as though he were the rightful patriarch of this family legacy. Lena sat close, her smile tight, her eyes gleaming with the confidence of someone who thought victory was already hers. Doyle, the man posing as their attorney, shuffled nervously beside them, sweat beading at his hairline. The bank representative cleared his throat. "We're here to finalize the authorization for asset transfer." He opened the folder, sliding it across the table. "We'll need confirmation of signatures before proceeding." Todd picked up the pen eagerly. "Of course," he said, scribbling his name with the flourish of a man convinced the ink would seal his triumph. Lena leaned closer, whispering something about investments and timelines. Belle waited until the last stroke of ink dried before she rose slowly from her chair. Her calm voice cut through the air like a blade. "Before we proceed, there are matters that need clarification." Todd frowned. "What matters?" "We've already settled this." Belle lifted a small device and pressed a button. From hidden speakers, a recording filled the room. Todd's voice, smug and certain. "Soon we'll have this all under control. She won't even have to think about it." Lena's laugh followed, sharp and undeniable. "She'll be out by next week. We'll have full control." The color drained from Todd's face. Lena straightened, her mouth parting in disbelief. Belle placed another document on the table, this one marked with the faint watermark she had embedded earlier. "This is the authorization signed at the hospital. We had it examined by a handwriting specialist. It's a forgery. Your mother's signature was traced. The evidence is irrefutable." Doyle's hands began to shake. The bank representative leaned back, folding his arms, his eyes hardening. Then came the final blow. Belle turned toward the door. "Officer?" A uniformed investigator stepped in, followed by another man carrying a thick folder of reports. They laid the documents on the table, financial records tracing offshore transfers, emails sent from an account under Lena's initials, and video recordings Carla had provided of Todd and Lena's conversations. "Mr. Doyle," the officer said, "our records show you're not a licensed attorney. You're under investigation for practicing without a permit and for facilitating fraud." Doyle stammered, his face pale. I was just following instructions." "Enough," Belle interrupted, her voice unwavering. She looked directly at Todd. "You and your wife attempted to strip your mother of her rights, her assets, and her dignity. You staged documents, you siphoned funds, and you nearly cost her life." Todd's composure cracked. He slammed his fist against the table, his voice breaking. "This isn't fair. I was only trying to protect what's mine." I lifted my head, my voice calm though my hands trembled. "Yours. None of this was ever yours. Not the house, not the money, not the legacy. It was entrusted to me, and you tried to steal it." The officer stepped forward. "Mr. Hartman, Mrs. Hartman, you'll need to come with us." For a moment, neither Todd nor Lena moved. Then the reality set in. The handcuffs clicked, the sound echoing in the sterile room. Lena's face twisted with rage as she was pulled to her feet. Todd looked at me, his eyes wide, pleading, desperate. "Mother, please." I held his gaze steadily. My heart ached, but my voice stayed firm. "You made your choice, and now you'll live with it." As they were led away, the room seemed to exhale. The bank representative gathered his papers, nodding with grim respect. Belle sat down again, her eyes softening as she looked at me. "It's over," she said quietly. But I knew it wasn't truly over. Not in the way stories tie up neatly, because betrayal like this doesn't just vanish with handcuffs. It leaves scars. It reshapes how you see the world. Still, as Gracie wheeled me out of that cold room, the sunlight streaming through the glass doors felt different. For the first time in weeks, I felt air fill my lungs without the weight of fear pressing down. Justice had spoken, not loudly, but with the steady voice of truth. The corridors of the hospital felt strangely quiet the morning after the meeting at the bank. News traveled fast in our small community, and whispers of what had happened followed me like shadows. But in my room, silence reigned, broken only by the steady beeps of the machines and the weight of what had just unfolded. When the officers brought Todd and Lena back to the hospital to collect their personal belongings before transferring them downtown, I was there. I wanted to be. Not because I craved revenge, but because I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. That this chapter was ending, that the chains of their ambition were no longer fastened to me. Todd entered first, his hands cuffed in front of him. His suit was wrinkled now, his tie loosened, his confidence shattered. Lena followed, her wrists bound as well, her chin lifted high in defiance, though her eyes betrayed fear. For a moment, I saw them not as villains, but as the people I had once loved. Todd, the boy who used to chase fireflies in our backyard, who once brought me dandelions in a jar and called them roses. Lena, the young woman who could have been a partner in building family had she chosen grace over greed. The memories clashed violently with the present, and I felt a deep ache in my chest. Todd's eyes locked on mine. His voice cracked, raw with desperation. "Mother, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I wanted to secure a future. For me, for Lena, for Evie." I held his gaze. My voice came out steady, though my heart trembled. "You raised your hand against me, not to protect, but to take. You chose money over blood. You chose power over love." Tears welled in his eyes. For the first time in years, he looked like the child I once knew. But I couldn't reach across the distance between us. Some bridges burned so completely that only ashes remain. Lena scoffed, her mask still intact. "She's playing the victim, Todd. Don't fall for it." Yet even her voice wavered. She knew. The fight was over, and the evidence stacked against them was too great. The officers motioned for them to move. Todd took one last step toward me, his words spilling in a rush. "Please, Mother, forgive me. Don't let it end like this." I closed my eyes for a brief moment, hearing Eleanor's voice in my memory. "Make it mean something." When I opened them, I spoke quietly, not in anger, but in finality. "I have forgiven you in my heart, Todd, but forgiveness does not erase consequence. You will answer for what you've done, and I will not shield you from it." He bowed his head, shoulders sagging as if the weight of truth had finally settled on him. The officers led them out, the clink of handcuffs echoing down the hallway until the sound faded. The room felt emptier than before, but also lighter. For the first time in months, I was not waiting for the next blow to fall. I was simply breathing, free of their shadow. Later, Belle visited with more documents. Among them was proof that Lena had sent emails impersonating me, attempting to access my accounts. The trail of deception was thorough, undeniable. "They'll face charges not only for fraud," Belle said, "but for attempted financial exploitation of an elder. The law will not take this lightly." I nodded, though my eyes burned with quiet grief. "I never wanted prison for my son," I admitted. "But I couldn't let him destroy everything Eleanor trusted me to protect." Belle touched my hand gently. "You chose peace over poison. That is no small thing." That evening, I sat by the window, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. I whispered softly to myself, words that felt like both a farewell and a vow. I raised a man who chose money over blood, and I chose peace over poison. The ache in my chest didn't vanish, but it softened. Pain and peace lived side by side, like two threads woven into the same cloth. Outside, I saw a family leaving the hospital together, a father carrying his child, a mother holding the door. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to imagine Todd and me in another life, one where love had triumphed over greed. Then I let the image fade, knowing I had to live in the world as it was, not as I wished it to be. The chapter of betrayal was closing. What remained was the long, patient work of healing, not just for me, but perhaps someday for Evie, who deserved to know that her grandmother fought not with bitterness, but with dignity. As night fell, I pulled the crayon drawing from beneath my pillow once more. Its bright sun and uneven letters reminded me that even in the darkest of stories, light could still break through. When I was finally discharged, the air outside the hospital felt different on my skin. It was early spring, and the breeze carried the faint scent of blooming lilacs from the small garden across the street. I had imagined this moment countless times during those long nights under sterile lights, walking free, breathing air not recycled through vents, and stepping back into my own life. But now, it wasn't just about returning home. It was about deciding what kind of life I wanted to build with the time I had left. Gracie came with me that day, her arms full of flowers she had picked up from the market. "For your new beginning," she said with a smile. She had been my constant, my ally when I was at my weakest, and her presence at my side made the world feel steadier. When we pulled up to my modest home, Evie was waiting in the yard. She ran toward me with the boundless energy only children carry, her laughter ringing like bells. Carla followed close behind, holding a basket of fresh bread. The sight of them, my granddaughter free to embrace me, and the woman I had once helped now helping me, was more healing than any medicine the hospital had given me. Inside, the house smelled faintly of dust and old books, but it was mine. The walls were lined with memories, family photos, Eleanor's shelves of journals, the clock that had ticked through decades of laughter and tears. For the first time in months, I felt rooted again. That afternoon, as sunlight poured through the kitchen window, I gathered them around the table. "I've been thinking," I began, "about what Eleanor's legacy really means. $10 million is just a number. It can be lost, stolen, or wasted. But honor, that is something you can pass on like a torch. I don't want her gift to end with me." Carla tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "I want to establish a foundation," I said, my voice steady. "The Eleanor Foundation. It will be dedicated to helping older women who've been taken advantage of by their own families, women who've been silenced, betrayed, left powerless. I want them to know they are not alone. That silence doesn't mean defeat." Gracie's eyes shone. "That's beautiful. Eleanor would be proud." Evie, though too young to understand fully, clapped her hands. "Can I help, Grandma?" I laughed softly, pulling her close. "You already have, my darling. You reminded me what's worth fighting for." As the weeks passed, the plan took shape. Belle agreed to help manage the legal side, ensuring every dollar was safeguarded. Carla offered to connect with local shelters and women's groups. Gracie volunteered her time, saying she had seen too many women in hospital beds with no one to fight for them. Even the bank representative who had witnessed Todd's downfall wrote a letter of support, acknowledging the importance of what we were building. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of amber, I sat on the porch with a notebook in my lap. I began to write the first pages of what would one day become my memoir. I titled it, "Inheritance Can't Buy Honor." The words flowed like water, each sentence carrying the weight of memory but also the lightness of release. It was during one of those evenings that a familiar figure appeared at my gate. Mr. Thorne, my old neighbor, walked, slowly but with dignity, a folded letter in his hand. His face was lined with years of sorrow, but his eyes carried a gentleness that time had not stolen. "I heard what happened," he said softly, "and I wanted to thank you for not letting history repeat itself." He handed me the letter, his hand trembling slightly. "You saved more than yourself. You saved people like me who thought no one would ever listen." I unfolded the paper later that night. It was a simple note, written in his careful handwriting. Thank you for proving that betrayal doesn't always win. Thank you for turning silence into power." I pressed the letter against my chest, tears slipping down my cheeks. It felt like a bridge between past and future, between those who had lost and those who would be saved. In that moment, I understood that Eleanor's inheritance was never meant to gild my twilight years with luxury. It was meant to be transformed into something greater, something that would outlive both of us. As I watched Evie chasing fireflies in the yard, her laughter filling the evening air, I whispered a silent vow. I would use every breath left in me to protect her world from the poison of greed. And through the foundation, I would give other women the tools to do the same. The night closed in, gently, not with fear, but with peace. My life was no longer defined by the betrayal that had nearly broken me. It was defined by what I chose to build from the ashes. The days grew longer, softer, filled with the simple rhythm of living. Morning sunlight streamed through my kitchen window as I brewed tea, the steam curling like ribbons into the air. In the afternoons, I sat on the porch with a book on my lap, though often I found myself simply watching the world go by. The neighbor's dog chasing a ball, the laughter of children drifting from down the street, the steady march of time reminding me of all that had been lost and all that had been found again. One evening, as the sky blushed with the colors of sunset, Evie climbed onto my lap with her sketchbook. She showed me a new drawing, me sitting in the garden, a halo of flowers around us, her hand in mine. Above it, she had written, in her uneven letters, "Grandma's house is safe." I kissed the crown of her head, my chest tightening with gratitude. In her innocence, she had captured what all the lawyers, signatures, and courtroom evidence had truly been about. Not wealth, not revenge, safety, dignity. The chance for her to grow up knowing that love could outlast betrayal. Carla came by that same night carrying fresh bread from her kitchen. Gracie joined us after her hospital shift, bringing flowers she said were rescued from a patient's bouquet that would have otherwise been thrown away. We sat around my small table, breaking bread, sharing laughter. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now hummed with life. Later, when everyone had gone and the evening had grown quiet, I carried my cup of tea out to the porch. The garden lay still under the fading light, the air sweet with the scent of lilacs. I eased myself into the old rocking chair Eleanor had once given me, its wooden frame creaking familiarly beneath my weight. For a long while, I simply sat in silence, letting the breeze brush across my face. The crayon drawing Evie had given me weeks ago was tucked into my notebook beside me, its bright sun now slightly smudged from the many times I had held it. I thought of Eleanor, of her steady hand guiding mine through childhood, of the letter she left urging me to make her gift mean something. I thought of Todd, of the boy he had been and the man he had become, and of the bitter truth that sometimes love cannot save someone from themselves. And I thought of every woman whose story had been silenced, who had been told she was too old, too weak, too useless to matter. The night deepened, and the garden glowed faintly under the moonlight. I lifted my cup, the porcelain warm against my palms, and whispered into the still air, words meant for anyone who might need them. "Sometimes," I said softly, "the greatest betrayal is not the knife in your back, but the silence when you needed a voice. But silence, too, can become your power. Just set the trap and wait." The rocking chair creaked gently, carrying me into the rhythm of the night. I closed my eyes and felt the weight of the past slip into something lighter, something that no longer chained me. For the first time in a long time, I was not afraid of what tomorrow might bring. Tomorrow would come, as it always does, and I would meet it not with bitterness, but with quiet strength. In that moment, I understood that my story was no longer just my own. It belonged to every person who had endured betrayal and chosen dignity, to every woman who had been silenced but found her voice again in patience and resolve. I smiled faintly into the night, the tea cooling in my hands, the crickets singing their quiet hymn. My life was no longer defined by what was taken from me, but by what I chose to build in its place, and that, I knew, was the truest inheritance of all.